Hello, guys. Welcome to another episode of Build with Brainyl. In this episode, I'll be discussing backstage style infrastructure deployment with AWS CloudFormation and Service Catalog. And I know for some people, backstage, like the word backstage is new, and that's why I have like on the screen backstage open because it's actually a thing. And if you see, like, let me zoom in a bit. It says that Backstage is an open source framework for building developer portals, right? Um, so there is this tool out there that is called Backstage, and it's basically for building developer portals. But what I really want you to pay attention to is developer portals, right? The fact that infra if you belong if you're like an infra develop like if you're an infrastructure developer or you're a DevOps engineer or platform engineer, most times you deal with the infrastructure, right? And sometimes these things are all powered by infrastructure as code, right? But again, you now think about like how do you serve the developers, right? Because one of the key things that we do is to service the developers. And in today's world, most times you see that in some people have different processes around it, right? But there is also the possibility of you giving your developers a portal. The whole idea is that it encourages them to self-serve, right? Because your developers don't know the infra as much as you do, right? And that can be a place where you can draw the line, more or less like say, okay, instead of you caring so much about the underlying infrastructure and all the infrastructure as code frameworks that are out there, you want to more or less like shield your developers from there and just give them like a backstage, like a UI, where they can basically go and deploy the things they're interested in. So whether it's a database, whether it's a VPC, whether it's a bucket, you can basically give them, right? In AWS, there's a tool that can do that, and it is called Service Catalog, right? It works hand in hand with CloudFormation. In some of my previous classes, I've introduced CloudFormation to tell you what CloudFormation is. That CloudFormation is actually um, an IAC tool, so infrastructure as code tool, and that is native to AWS that allows you to build your AWS infrastructure as code, right? So basically, what I want to draw out is that in AWS there is a way you can actually create like these developer portals and just let your developers self-serve, right? That way, you're actually letting them focus on the development that they do while you take care of the infrastructure, and then you create these portals for them to basically not get to worry about like writing CloudFormation template or writing CDK constructs, right, to create infrastructure. So I'm going to take you to my to a repo that I did work that I've worked on as part of like training on here, like just training AWS. So it's a very simple. So if you see it, it says it's a very simple CloudFormation template, right? But we did go through it, just deploy it. It's a very simple one, just to introduce CloudFormation. And if you're familiar with CloudFormation, you know we can take in parameters, right? So bucket name, in this case, we have like an environment, we have mappings, conditions, resource. It kind of tries to identify some of the things you will see in a CloudFormation template, right? So we're creating an S3 bucket. There is like a bucket policy. So this is normal. This is basic stuff, right? Obviously, you can have more complex CloudFormation templates than this one, but this drives from the point. So think about it that your developers don't need to know all this, right? All your developers care about is they want to deploy a bucket. They want to deploy an S3 bucket. And sometimes you are trying to more or less like give them more or less like an easy to use tool for them to just deploy the buckets while following best practice, right? So it's more or less like you will be doing many of the things like making sure the right policies are in place to make sure the bucket is secure, making sure there's appropriate tagging along with the resources they are creating. You can do all those setting, but just give them. They just want to create a bucket, right? And then behind the scene, you can more or less like put all the details that is needed for the bucket to be secure, to have all the if it needs to have the right tags, for cost allocation and all that. You can build that into the template and CloudFormation, while the developers will just self-serve, right? I want a bucket, and they're just going to go there and provision a bucket, right? And I'm going to show you how that works in AWS. So there's a tool called Service Catalog, right? It says take control of your company's cloud resources, and that's really what it is. So Developers cloud infrastructure engineers will manage the infrastructure, and then you use cloud service catalog to basically help people self-serve, right? And we're going to see how that works. It is built on, so in order for us to start, we're going to identify two different entities here, right? So there is really someone who is a developer. So we need to create that developer first. So I'm going to go to IAM. So here I'm actually logged in as a management, somebody who can do all this, some of these things, right? So I'm going to go to users. And in the user, I want to create a developer. So I'm going to create a developer here. I'm going to say it's a developer, right? Cool. I'll give him access to the console because think about it, you want them to come back to the console to pretty much provision a product, right? So I'm going to give them a custom password. Um, okay, I've given it the password. I don't really need them to create a new password at next sign in. I don't want that because I'm just testing. So it's a developer. I'm going to do policies. So in this case, it needs me to give it permission. So I'm going to attach a couple of permissions. So the first one I want to do is um, service catalog, catalog. So I think it's end user full access. So there's really end user full access, but for this demo, I will give them read only access, right? So I'm going to do this. I'm going to do next. I'm going to do create the user. So we've created the developer, right? So I'm going to return to the list. So what do we have? We have a basic developer, right? If you see it, it can basically list, change set. It can do a couple of things, but mostly read actions, read only actions, right? Um, so you can basically, so while I'm here, I pretty much will just add another permission. Okay, so I'm just going to add a different permission and say CloudFormation, and you'll see how that will be useful as time goes on. Okay, so I'm going to do CloudFormation read only. I want them to be able to see stacks being created, stacks that are being deleted, all that. Maybe I want to allow them, and I also want to add two more permissions, right? So here I'm going to go more or less like attach policies. No, I'm actually going to go back to the developer, and then here I'm going to create an inline policy. Okay, so what I'm going to do is that I'm going to search for service catalog. So I'm do service catalog. Okay, and in here, that's the service. I want two write actions. And the first one will be for them to be able to provision the product because that's really what I want to do. I want the developers to be able to provision the product. And I also want them to be able to terminate their provision product. So update provision product, provision the product. Maybe I also want them to be able to terminate the product that they provision, right? So I'm going to check for terminate provision product. It's here. So they can do all that. And for now, I'll just do all resources, but you can tie this down if you wanted. I'm just going to go here. I'm going to call it allow service catalog action, the ones we care about, right? So I'm going to create that policy. So right now, the developer has three permissions. Two are read-only. The three write permissions that are out there is just for them to be able to provision the product, update the product, and also terminate it, right? So we're good. So one thing we also need is we need an IAM role, right? Because now the developer can only provision a product. They can also terminate a product. But the product they are creating needs permission to create the resources, right? So we need a role, and you'll see where that becomes handy as time goes on. Okay. So I'm going to create a role, and who will use this role? I'll call it service catalog, right? Service catalog is who will use the role. Okay. And then I'll do next. And then I will just give them CloudFormation full access, right? Because remember, um, the developer is not the one creating the stack. Something is going to create the stack on behalf of the developer, right? So we need that thing to be able to create the stack. So I'll give it CloudFormation full access, and I also give it S3 full access. Um, so Amazon S3 full access. I'm going to go next. I'll call it CloudFormation role. Okay. So a role already exists. Let me just check and be sure. CloudFormation. Okay, looks like I have a role that is here. I'm just going to delete it so we do it fresh. Okay, so I'm just going to delete this role. We'll create a role together. Service catalog. Okay, just to make sure we go through it together. Okay, so service catalog. I'm going to do next. I'm going to do CloudFormation full access, and I'm also going to do S3 full access. Okay, because I know you will need CloudFormation. And then because if you think about the IAC, you also need to create, like you basically need to also access like a bucket, right? So here, I'm going to do CloudFormation role, right? And then I'm just going to leave it as that, and then I'm going to create a role. So up until this point, we did create a user that has just the permission to see stacks, see CloudFormation stack, and then be able to provision a product, update product and delete product. And we also created a role, and that role is what we actually, that will do the job, right? And you're going to see where that becomes useful. So now we've created that on one side. So what is now, how do we now do it in Service Catalog? So if we go to Service Catalog, there's a number of things we'll see here. But the two things that are the most, more or less like the most important that you need to get used to is like the product list and the portfolios, right? Product list, let's create our first product. So product is basically a product. Maybe in this case, maybe this is an S3 product, right? It could be a VPC product. It could be a database product. It could be, maybe a product can even be something that has S3, VPC, and all that. Everything that makes it a product. But in this case, we have a very, very small product that we're building. So we'll create a product. So we're going to, so this is admin trying to create a product. We will create a product. We'll call it my S3 product. I'll call it my S3 product, okay? The owner is me, I'm Brainyl. Use templates, I'm going to use a template. So what I've done is, I think I'm just going to download this file, right? So I've downloaded it. This is the exact file that I want to use. So what I'm going to do is I'll use this first option that says use a template, and I'm going to do upload file. And this is the template that I've just downloaded. I'm going to upload it. And then obviously it's a product. It means products can have versions, right? So this is, I'll call it V1, okay? I'll say my V1 S3 product, okay? So I have that. Support, yeah, you can have like a email contact, think about it that maybe there's a team handling this, and you want to like add like a contact information, right? But in this case, I don't think we don't need it. So I'm just going to do create product, okay? So my S3 product has been created. It's a CloudFormation template, right? Basically. The next thing I want to do is to go to portfolios. And portfolios are basically, like a group, a place where you can have products. So a portfolio is how you organize your products, organize the access around those products. So we're going to create a portfolio. In this case, maybe I want to call it dev portfolio. Okay, maybe that's what I want to call it. So I say my dev portfolio. Maybe you have a different portfolio in dev, different portfolio in prod, or however you are organizing your portfolios. But just so you know, portfolios will house products, and then within there you see more options that we can have. But like it's a collection, you can use it to arrange how you issue out products out. And portfolios, as we'll see at later, they can be shared. So it means you can organize it in such a way that you can pretty much distribute it right around the organization. So my dev portfolio is really what I'm creating. I'll give myself the owner, Brainyl, and I'm just going to create the portfolio, right? So once we create the portfolio and we go in, you now see there is like a products column, there is like a constraints column, and all. So we already have a product. We created one the other time. So we're going to add that product to this portfolio. Okay, so we'll do my S3 product, we'll add product to portfolio. Once we have that, the next thing we want to do is access, right? Your portfolio needs access. The point is, who has access to this portfolio? So that's what we're going to be doing. And you see that IAM principals and principal names, right? So to grant access, instead I'm granting to a group, a role, or a user. In this case, we already have a developer user that I want to grant access. So I'm going to grant them access. The next thing we want to do, because there are two ways you will do it, is either the developer, you give them so much permission, which you don't want to do. You don't want to be giving all the groups, all the users, all the IAM entities that you're going to be granting access. You don't want to be giving them all those permissions. And that's why when we're creating the developer, we only give them permission to create a product, like provision a product, update the product, delete the product if they want it, right? But that's where constraint comes in, because that's what tells you that, okay, when you're trying to create a product, use this IAM rule, right? And that rule will have the permission it needs to basically provision the product, okay? So here we're going to, so you can see constraints, use constraints to apply rules to a product when an end user launches it from this portfolio, right? So it's basically rules, right, that you can use to, that you can actually constraints to apply, like use constraints to apply rules, right? So more or less like rules that you're applying, right, to a product when the end user is launching it, right? And that's why we only give the user the permission to launch the product, right? But the constraint is now what controls everything behind the scene. And there are many constraints we're going to see. So we'll choose a product, and then we're going to give it a launch constraint, right? There are many other constraints here that you can set, like notification, who gets notified, tag updates, stack, there's so many things. But here, let's just care about like the launch constraint. And here we're going to select an IAM rule. The point is that when you're launching, we need you to use an IAM rule for that launch to happen. So it's like a rule. You're applying this IAM rule, as a constraint on top of this product, right? So here we're just going to look for the rule that we created, right? So we'll say my launch, constraints. So we'll do constraint, okay? So once we have these, I'm just going to do create, right? Cool. So what have we done? We created a product. We created a product, we created a portfolio, we attached the product into the portfolio. We granted access to the developer, right? The developer. So we granted the developer access to the portfolio. And once that was done, we created a constraint, right? And the thing is that we're using constraint to handle their rules, right? That you can set. So notifications. In this case, we created one that says when you are creating the product, use this role, right? And that role, we created it at the beginning. It has the permission to create stack. So it has CloudFormation full stack, yeah. So if you check it, I think it's CloudFormation. I'm just trying to remember the name. I think it's yes, CloudFormation full access, right? And it also has S3 full access. So with that in place, I think we're almost good. The next thing we want to do, so an admin has done all this. So this is the admin. So it could be you, it could be an admin. The point is that on one end, you have already created a product, you have already linked, created a portfolio, you've linked everything, you've set up access, you've set up constraint. At this point, you want the developer to be able to just go in and then be able to launch product. So let's try that. So I'm just going to go here and I'm going to add a session, right? I hope you know in AWS you can do like multi-session login. Okay, so I'm just going to try to add a new session. In this case, I'm going to use a developer that I created, and then I'm going to use password that I also created. And cool, it's logging me in, right? So it's not logging me in, and I'm into the account. So one thing you also notice, you see a lot of access denied, which is good because yeah, we only give them permissions to do a set of things. So what we're going to do is we'll go to Service Catalog first. The good thing is that just right away we can see our products, right? We can see our product, we can see provision product. We don't have any, but at least we can see the product we created on the other end, right? So it means that permission that we gave for them to user access read only is working here. Service Catalog user access, like the read only is working. They can see products, right? And remember, we also give them permission to be able to launch a product. So we'll try to launch this product. So it did say, what do we want to name the product? So I'll call it my S3 product, right? That's what I want to call it. You can see it gave me the V1. So sometimes maybe you're using the V1. Maybe there's an update from the infra team. Maybe that's in V2. You probably will need to update the product for you to get the V2 version. But in this case, honestly, we're using the V1, and it says my V1 S3 product, exactly how it was defined, right? Where do you think this came from? My demo bucket and the environment. Check it. It's all here. So if you scroll up, you see that the template itself had definition for you to be able to pass in the bucket name. It has definition for you to be able to specify the environment, right? So dev or prod or my bucket name, right? So all that were baked into the template, and you as a developer, all you need to do is provide those variables and you should be good to go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back here and I'm saying I'm going to do my demo bucket, Brainyl, service, I'll just call it service catalog, right? Just to make sure it's completely unique. Okay. So when I do that, I can leave the environment as dev. I'm just going to, before I do this, I'm going to type cloud formation. Okay. So formation, I'm going to open it in a new tab, right? And I'm going to show you what that will look like. But again, you remember that we gave the developer read-only permission to CloudFormation. That's why they can see stacks and all that. So what we can also do is that when we create this launch product, yeah, the developer can launch the product. So you can see Service Catalog is launching my S3 product. One thing you notice is that if you refresh this, beautifully, a stack is being created, right? Remember, this stack is using the launch constraint that was set, and that is what is being used to create this stack, right? So we can also refresh. It's going to take its time and then create this stack on behalf of the user, right? But remember, if you think about the user actually doesn't have those permission, right? The user only has permission to basically provision the product. They can update the product. They can also delete the product. But behind the scene, we're assuming a different role and we're using it to actually provision the product, right? So you can see how we're just easing the role of the developer, right? Let them focus on what they are good at, right? And then we can handle the infrastructure and basically create a backstage for them to just interact with infrastructure without being very, very technical about the underlying implementation, which in this case is obviously CloudFormation, or if you were using CDK, or if I think there's also an option there for you to use Terraform to do this, right? But you can see the stack is created. What we can see is what are the resources. There was a bucket policy. There was also a bucket, an S3 bucket that was created, right? So I'm trying to go there, and I'm very sure I will not be able to open it because I don't have the permission. You can see insufficient permission to list objects, right? Because the developer actually doesn't have permission to view. He only just has permission to basically provision the resource, right? Maybe that's what we want. Maybe that's not what we want. It depends on your use case. But the most important thing is that that product is provisioned. So if I go to provision products now, you see from the developer side, you can see there is a provision product, right? So what can we do? We can basically go back and, more or less like terminate the product. You can update it, you can, do other things. But one thing we can also do is we can terminate, right? So when you do terminate, for example, you terminate the provision product and you go back to the stack and you refresh, you see that delete is in progress. And one thing you notice, if I go to buckets, obviously I can't list buckets, right, in this account because I don't have the permission. But after a while, this bucket should have been deleted, right? So you can see the bucket is deleted. I'm sure if we refresh this page, we shouldn't see the bucket again, right? So you see the bucket is gone. So we actually using CloudFormation behind the scenes, so infrastructure as code, but all that is abstracted from the developer, right? They don't really need to know. All they care about is there is a product, a VPC product, maybe a database product or something, whatever you name it, and whatever resource is behind that product. All the developer wants is that I want to be able to install this product, right? I just want to pass parameters to decide how the product is going to look like in the AWS account, and that's really all they care about. They don't really care about like what is the implementation behind it, and that is good because you don't want your developers to go leave the development that they're doing to go and be learning CloudFormation, right? So the product is gone. We have a developer who is still here, but now he doesn't have like, but there's still a list of product. He can always, provision it as many times as he wants. But now he doesn't have provision product again. Okay, cool. So that is like in a nutshell. There is really more you can do with portfolios. For example, like you can share portfolios, right? And that's like a powerful feature that I probably will not be doing on this call. But just know that there's so many things that you can do with Service Catalog. But this is like more or less like a friendly introduction for you to see how powerful it is, for you to have like a backstage that your developers can use to pretty much just deploy infrastructure products, right? Without, being forced to understand the technicalities that is behind it. Okay. And with that, what we will just do is that let's do some cleanup. Okay. So we'll just do cleanup. What I'm just going to do is I'm going to go to product list. First of all, you need to go to the portfolio. You need to basically remove the product. So you have to remove the product from the portfolio, else you'll not be able to delete the portfolio. You also need to remove access that you have. So in this case, remove the access. So in this case, we are removing the developer from being able to access this portfolio. Constraint, I don't think we need to. I think we should be able to delete the portfolio, even with a constraint in there. But let's try. Yeah, we were able to. So the portfolio is gone, but you need to remove the product and also the access for you to be able to successfully delete the portfolio. And now, once we've deleted the portfolio, we can actually go back to our product and say maybe we don't need it again. You can basically delete the product, and it's going to say delete. Remember, the product itself is not the one that is provisioned, right? The product is like a template of what can be provisioned. Okay, so I'm just going to delete. And yeah, we're back to how it used to be. So Service Catalog, CloudFormation, they're very powerful. You know why we do CloudFormation, IAC, infrastructure as code. It's very, very important. It's going to help you, make create environments that are that are reproducible, right? Click If you go to an environment and you do a lot of ClickUps, a lot of that are not reproducible. But when you have like an IAC, infrastructure as code, which you can do with CloudFormation, it makes that easy, right? And then Service Catalog on top of that just now makes it, like it's like you now have you can deploy infrastructure as code, but you can also now give like you can give like a portal to your developers for them to just install. It's like you are installing infrastructure, right? And there is really a lot that you can do with Service Catalog. But I hope I've been able to more or less like just introduce you to how powerful this is and many of the things you can do with it. Please, if you like this video, subscribe, like the video, share it to people you feel will benefit from it, and I'll be creating more videos like this. And let me know in the comment section if you found value from watching this video. Thank you. I'm going to see you. I'm going to see you some other time. All right. Thank you for watching.